Right, so good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Walley's Quarry Scrutiny subgroup, which is meeting this afternoon. And there is an agenda as printed, and I intend to take the agenda in the order that we have it in. So my first question is, and I personally have none, but others may have, do we have any apologies for the meeting this afternoon?
Yes, Chair, we have an apology from Councillor Jill Heason.
Okay. So if we could record that, please. Do we have any further apologies that we know of? As I say, I checked my mail about 10 minutes ago and I know of none personally. In that case, let's proceed. And our next point is just to say welcome to people who are out there watching this and to introduce ourselves. So I'm Councillor Andrew Fear, and I'm chairing this subgroup. And perhaps if we could go through the other councillors at the moment. So Marion.
I'm Councillor Marion Reddish. I think I know most of you. Thistlebury Ward Councillor, where the Walley's Quarry is.
Councillor Jones.
I'm Councillor Dave Jones. I'm the Borough Councillor, one of the Borough Councillors for Silverdale, and the County Councillor for Keele, Nutton and Silverdale. And
Councillor Rout. I'm doing this on the order that they appear on my screen. I'm not trying to do anything in odd fashion.
I'm Councillor Rout, the other Borough Councillor for Silverdale and Parkside. Okay.
So beyond that, who else do we need to introduce? I suppose we need to introduce Mr. Fleet from planning.
I'm Sean Fleet. I'm the head of the planning service at Newcastle Council.
And perhaps Mr. Lowe.
Tim Lowe, yeah. I work for the Environment Agency in the installations team.
Anybody else? Mr. Bird, perhaps?
Yeah, Andrew Bird. I'm head of recycling and fleet services for the Borough Council.
Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, I'm Steve Thomason. I work for the Environment Agency. I'm the installation team leader, and I manage the installations team that regulate Walley's Quarry.
Who else have we got on the screen? Is Dennis?
Yeah, Sarah Dennis. Work for the Environment Agency. I'm an installations technical lead. One of the lead officers for regulation of the Walley's Quarry.
Mr. Lyons.
I'm Adam Lyons. I'm the Area Environment Manager for the Environment Agency for Staffordshire.
And finally, Mr. Roger P., who I think will have to unmute himself because he seems muted. There we are.
Hi, I'm Roger P. I'm a technical specialist on the EPR installation team with Tim and Sarah. I've got 32 years waste regulation experience, and I've been looking after Walley's Quarry engineering for a number of years now.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's all the people I can see on screen anyway, so I hope I've not missed anyone in that respect. I think we can move on to our third agenda item, which is just to give some background to what we're doing. So this is a subcommittee of a scrutiny committee of the council, which was set up when that scrutiny committee decided it wanted to look into the operations of Walley's Quarry. And we plan to have a series of meetings. This is the second of those meetings. The first meeting was to invite comment from members of the general public, which we duly recorded. We then move on to this meeting, and the intention of this meeting is to look at the Environment Agency in particular's role in all of this. And we've placed a series of questions in front of them, and I believe they're going to give us a presentation which will hopefully address those questions, and they will then be open to question by the members of the committee. We were hoping to have a highways representative from Staffordshire County Council, but unfortunately they say they're not available for this, although they are available to take written questions from the committee. That I feel is regrettable, but it's beyond our control to do anything about. So essentially, that's where we are in the process. This is the second meeting, and at the end of the series of meetings, this group will formulate a series of points which it feels would be useful to take forward. That will be then fed to the Scrutiny Committee, and it will be fed back to the Council. Before we go on any further, I think the next agenda item is just to ask Mr. Fleet, the Head of Planning, to take us through the planning history of this site, and then I'll invite the Environmental Agency to make their presentation.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, the planning history of this site as well, to confirm what the site is in the first case. There are 3 parcels of land. The Walley's Quarry itself, that's one part of the site, which has been subject to planning history for the tipping of waste on it. But there are 2 adjoining parcels of land, the residential parcels of land known as Gallingale Way, the Persimmon development, and to the south, the Hamptons residential site as well. So the planning history for the actual quarry itself and the tipping is managed through the a neighbouring authority, the County Council, which has dealt with the waste and tipping management of that site. So that has been subject to a historical approval, which in time has been subject to review applications known as ROMPs, which have looked at the permissions for tipping and management of waste. Originally it was for general waste, but that was extended in the ROMP reviews to allow for organic materials to be tipped in the site as well, and that runs until 2027, as I recall. The residential developments which are adjoining it have been subject to appeal histories as well. So the Gallingale development itself was originally applied for in '98 and that got refused, but the council as district authority granted an outline consent, but the reserve matters details for the residential estate were refused and only allowed on appeal. The Hamptons estate to the south were also refused as an outline, and concerns about odour and other problems with the site, but again that was allowed on appeal, and that has consent now outstanding for 130 houses. So we have those 3 parcels of land which have been brought forward, and consideration of the relationship of those has been undertaken mainly by the planning inspectorate in the appeals process, but that has been found to be acceptable subject to control measures from the sites in terms of the environmental permit that covers the quarry site in terms of impact on the residential development. So that's a short potted history of the planning development of the sites. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fleet. And now perhaps if I could hand over to our colleagues from the Environmental Agency to make the presentation to this group.
Thank you, Chair. I guess just before I hand over to our officers, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today about our regulation of Walley's Quarry. I am aware we've got a number of slides to present today, some of them to aid the conversation, but also for some of them to use afterwards as a source of information for anybody watching this. Our officers will try to pick out the pertinent points for those. And I think if we allow them to finish the presentation and then invite questions at the end, it may help with the time in running and answering the questions. So I'll hand over now to our officers. I think it's Stephen first to just take us through the introduction.
Thank you for that, Adam. Thank you, Chair. If we can start with the presentation, slide 2, which is labelled the role of the Environment Agency. Right, thank you very much, Chair. First, the format of the presentation today will be a little bit of background about the Environment Agency and the codes and the frameworks we work to, and obviously what we're responsible for, and then it will move into other areas to do with engineering, compliance and amenity. So if we can start off, as we said, with the role of the Environment Agency. We were established in 1996 to protect and improve the environment. Within England, we're responsible for regulating major industry and waste treatment of contaminated land, water quality and resources, fisheries, inland river, estuary and harbour navigations, conservation and ecology. We're also responsible for managing the risk of flooding from main rivers, reservoirs, estuaries and the sea. Our head office is in Bristol, and we have another office in London, and we have offices across England divided into 14 areas. The Walley's Quarry landfill, what we're here to talk about today, is located within the West Midlands area, which is one of our larger area boundaries. I'd also like to add that the Walley's landfill compliance team consists of landfill engineer, technical leaders, installation officer, all with over 20 years experience, which is including landfill regulation. We also have involved air quality monitoring, which is our specialist national air quality team, and we have communications and engagement support. And this is the team that forms the Walley's landfill compliance team. If I could ask Chair for the next slide, please. Yeah, so what this slide's about is just explaining to everybody that we have a regulators code, which basically provides a framework for how we should engage with our customers, our regulated customers. It's statutory guidance, and the Environment Agency have to follow the code and the requirements within the regulatory code. And some of the key requirements of that code is to support compliant business growth, engage with business over the way regulation is delivered, take a risk-based and proportional approach to regulation, and share information with other regulators where practicable, provide an advice and guidance on how to comply, and obviously publishing the service standards. So the key requirements of the regulators code. There is a growth duty, which requires us and other national regulators to have regard to the desirability of promoting economic growth alongside our other statutory duties. So, for example, when taking enforcement action, the guidance says that the cost of remedying non-compliance should be kept to a minimum, but that does not mean the cost should be a reason why compliance is not required. The framework, we work within a framework of government and legislation. Our role is to implement regulations and the environmental standards set by the government. We have discretions on when, where and how to act. We target activities and sites that pose the greatest risk and achieving the best possible outcomes for environment and people. We set conditions and issue permits to make sure environmental standards will be met. And conditions on a landfill site include emissions to air, land and water, management systems, monitoring and amenity issues. And we also check to ensure that operators are compliant with the requirements of the permits, if necessary, take enforcement action. And that summarises what the regulatory framework is. Could I have the next slide, please, Chair? We do not regulate all aspects of the waste and industry sites. As we previously heard, the local planning authority responsible for issuing planning permissions. Those normally control the operating life, which is the end date for the landfill, the final height, often referred to as landfall, number of vehicle movements and operating hours. Local authority have statutory duties for regulating small industries, producing air quality plans and responding to incidents under statutory nuisance powers. I would ask that any questions regarding these issues should be directed to the relevant authority. Could I have the next slide, please, Chair?
Steve, it's Adam. I think we might need just to go back a slide.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, Steve, you're on the second bit of what isn't our role.
Thank you very much. Yeah, what is not part of our role is sorry, apologies. Got a technical issue. As I was saying, the final part of this, what we also we're not health professionals and cannot provide health advice. We do seek advice from Public Health England and making decisions on issuing permits and request their advice when required. For example, when completing our air quality monitoring, which we've sought through when we carried out the monitoring exercise of this particular landfill, which we'll cover later in the presentation. We do, when talking to residents and people, provide them with the advice that if they've got health concerns regarding personal health, they should visit their general practitioner or GP. So thank you for that. If I can now pass you over to Sarah Dennis, who will conduct the next part of the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
I don't know if we have a technical problem at the moment. Do we need the next slide?
We do, yes, please.
Thank you. There's two environmental permits at the Walley Quarry landfill site. The main permit for the landfill was issued in June 2005. Initially, as you're aware, that was issued to Lafarge Aggregates. The permit was transferred to the operator, which is actually Red Industries RM Limited, on the 3rd of November 2016. The permit does allow the operation of a non-hazardous landfill. It does also allow the operation of a separate cell, which is permitted to accept stable non-reactive hazardous waste, which is waste such as gypsum and asbestos. The operator has never used a separate cell and not indicated to us that they intend to. So currently, stable non-reactive hazardous waste are not accepted. So only non-hazardous waste being accepted at the landfill. The total quantity of waste allowed at the landfill at Walley Quarry is currently 250,000 tonnes a year. Non-hazardous waste, a term obviously we use, includes municipal and industrial wastes, and we'll touch on that a bit more later. As you're aware, a variation application is being determined at the moment to increase the annual tonnage, and we'll have more on that on a later slide. The permit is a public registered document and can be requested by anybody on request, so anyone can ask for that. Can you just go to the next slide, please? The permit also covers a number of other activities associated with the landfill. That includes a leachate treatment plant and also a landfill gas compound, which includes landfill gas engines and flare, which are used for the utilisation and management of landfill gas from the landfill. There's also numerous tables and conditions in the permit. There's over 10 tables of monitoring requirements for landfill gas, leachate, surface water and groundwater at a number of points around the landfill with many different monitoring frequencies. The second permit that's in place at Walley Quarry is a permit for soil treatment facility. That permit was issued on the 11th of April 2012, and it allows the treatment of waste to produce soil substitutes or aggregates. The operator doesn't currently undertake that activity, but that's a permit that they may use when it comes to restoration of the landfill site. Go to the next slide, please. I mentioned the annual tonnage. We have got an ongoing variation application being determined. We received an application from the site operator to increase the amount of waste permitted at the landfill back on the 12th of December 2018. Initially, that application was to increase the waste from 250,000 tonnes to 300,000 tonnes. In May 2019, the operator requested a change to that application for the increase to go from 250,000 tonnes to 400,000 tonnes. We accepted that change to the application because at that time we'd actually completed minimal work on the application. We consulted on the application in May 2019, which is an external consultation. It's something we don't normally do on applications, but we decided in this case this was something we needed to do. Any concerns and questions that were highlighted from that consultation were reviewed, and where issues were raised to the Environment Agency, those have been taken account into a draft decision document. In August, on the 19th of August this year, in 2020, for a period of 28 days, we did a further consultation on our draft decision for this variation application. And our draft decision is to issue the variation and permit the increased annual tonnage. That consultation has now closed. The consultation documents included a draft decision so people could see how comments have been taken into account. We're currently reviewing the comments from that recent consultation before we make a final decision on the application. We will only issue a permit variation if it can be demonstrated to us that harm to the environment, people and wildlife will be minimised and the operator has got the ability to meet the conditions of the permit. Providing a business can prove that the proposed activities meet all the legal requirements, then we are legally obliged to issue a permit, even if some people do not approve of that decision. Go to the next slide, please. With the variation, there has been talk of will the site close earlier or not. So we understand the site's planning permission from Staffordshire County Council requires waste disposal to cease by 2026. The additional waste could enable the site to be completed sooner. That could allow it to be completed by 2024, but it's up to the operator's decision whether or not they accept the additional waste or not. So yes, it could be sooner, but it may actually still be 2026. We did allow a temporary position, what we refer to as a local enforcement position, to allow the site to accept up to 400,000 tonnes of waste. That was in 2019 only. They are decisions that we can take at our own discretion. and we use those positions to work within the regulator's code and support business and take a risk-based approach and proportionate approach to regulation. So that position was allowed for 2019. Go to the next slide, please. We mentioned, and people have asked questions about the waste types that are allowed at the Walley Quarry landfill. The permit includes about 300 different non-hazardous waste types which are allowed to be permitted. It's a standard list of wastes which are included on all non-hazardous waste landfill permits. The waste type list is listed as 6-digit codes, which would look slightly different to people. The codes are separated into different sources, so some of those sources which are detailed on the slides, which include sources of waste from agriculture, thermal processes, construction, demolition, and waste from other waste management facilities, and also municipal waste. There's certain waste which are banned from landfill by legislation, and the details of those are included in the slide, things such as liquid waste and explosive, corrosive, infectious, medical waste, and whole and shredded tiles. To the next slide, please. This slide just gives a summary of the non-hazardous waste that were accepted at Walley Quarry in 2019. In 2019, the landfill accepted just over 360,000 tonnes of waste. As you can see from the slide, the most of that waste comes under what we refer to as Chapter 19 waste, which is waste from water and waste treatment facilities. That waste stream from waste treatment facilities is normally waste which can't be treated at waste transfer stations. So a waste transfer station would normally remove waste such as wood, metals, etc. for recycling. The remaining waste is often shredded and then transferred and bulked to landfill. So that's the main waste that was accepted at the landfill in 2019. Go to the next slide, please. Just to go over our compliance and regulation of the Walley Quarry landfill, our compliance process is there, and we carry it out to check that operators are meeting the requirements set out in the conditions of their permits. The process is risk-based, it's planned, and we produce and we summarise all of our compliance work on compliance assessment report forms, which are available on the public register. The permit for Walley's includes 24 main conditions with an additional 70 conditions. As we said, there's over 10 tables of monitoring requirements. Our compliance visits are there to check that the operator is meeting the requirements of those conditions. We wouldn't review all the conditions on a single visit. A visit would focus on site-specific issues or sometimes area or national priorities. We said that all of our summaries of all our work and our compliance work is put on car forms. They summarise the assessments made and they record any compliance or non-compliance with permit conditions. The slide explains the different types of activities that we do undertake, from site visits, audits, reviews of reports, and procedure reviews. Compliance activities are all given a score, so officers are required to record all non-compliances. Categories of scores against for permit breaches are ranged from either 1 to 4, and they represent the severity of the reasonable foreseeable impact. Scores are then accumulated on an annual basis, and the annual score affects an operator's annual charge they have to pay to the agency for their annual permit. Next slide, please. The table there just gives a summary of the compliance activities that have been undertaken at Walley Quarry for the last 2 years and up to the 1st of September this year, and also summarises the permit breaches that were recorded. In 2019, there were 11 permit breaches recorded against the permit. 10 of those related to monitoring issues, including exceedance of limits and missing monitoring. We have action plans in place to address those. One of those includes a missing groundwater point, which has an action plan in place, and a variation to address some other issues. Breaches relating to monitoring, although that may seem a lot, they're common across the landfill sector. The sector is required to include a considerable amount of monitoring for various things, from grass, groundwater, leachate, and surface water. It is important to ensure that monitoring is taken out, is undertaken, and to ensure that any issues are addressed for both the current and the long-term monitoring of the site. The remaining breach in 2019 related to site management. That was during an unannounced visit when the site manager was on leave, and we didn't consider that there was adequate staff on site with a full understanding of the permit conditions. In 2019, you also see we undertook 2 major audits. One of those was an audit of the management plan, and the second was an audit of the landfill gas management at the facility. The second one, the landfill gas audit, that included significant reviews of data and visits by up to 3 officers over 2 separate days, so quite a considerable major audit. In 2020, up to the 1st of September, considering that we have had some restrictions due to COVID-19, there's been 8 separate breaches of the permit, completed 10 visits, 2 procedure reviews and 8 permit reviews. 6 of those breaches also related to monitoring issues. The remaining 2 breaches related to when we determined that there was odour off-site in March. That was a level that officers considered was causing pollution, was in breach of the permit. And a permit breach was also recorded for the company not using appropriate measures to prevent odour. And at that time, we considered that the cover material they're using comprised too much of waste fines, which could itself be odorous, and insufficient soils. The operator was required to review the use of fines and increase the amount of soils. We've completed revised procedures, and we've been satisfied with their actions in that on future site visits. Residents have asked about why can't you just close the site down? So we do understand that that's what residents want, but it's not as simple as closing the gates at a landfill site. Once a landfill is full, it does have to be capped, and this will be covered in some of the engineering section later. And after closure and final capping, the permit conditions still remain. The operator still has to continue the monitoring required by the permit, and they have to provide financial provision to us for that. Just to put our compliance activity into perspective, the site has been a focus of regulation by the compliance team. The normal annual charge for a landfill site for the baseline compliance activities would include 1 audit, 4 site inspections, 4 monitoring reviews, and normally 1 engineering inspection. So you can see that we haven't completed considerably more activity at the Walley site in the last couple of years. Next slide, please. We've completed 2 air quality monitoring exercises at the around the Walley's Quarry landfill. Study 1 was completed from July 2017 to 14th of February 2018. The monitor was located in the grounds of the sewage pumping station, which you can see there on the slide. In the second study, the monitor was located to the rear of the Gardener's Garden Centre. During the study, we were asked to move the monitor on the 12th of February. The monitor wasn't moved a large distance, but really from one side of the access road to the rear of to the compound at the rear of the garden centre. That study was taking place between the 15th of January 2019 and the 25th of June 2019. During that study, some reviews of the weather data showed that the wind was blowing towards the monitoring location for 51% of the time. The next slide, please. Full information there, but there's an extract there, which are the findings of the both monitoring exercises. For the first monitoring exercise, the monitoring was continuous during both studies. The monitors weren't turned off, and all of the data was included within the reports. The monitoring stations are calibrated during the studies to ensure that the data remains accurate. For the first study that we concluded, the conclusions were that substances measured were all within air quality standards. Hydrogen sulfide, which often people describe as an eggy gas smell, it was above the level which could cause ozone nuisance, but importantly below health impact levels for 1% of the monitoring time. And the highest level of particulates was from the direction of residential properties to the southwest of the monitoring site. The highest level of hydrogen sulfide and methane was actually not from the direction of the landfill on that study, but from the north of the monitoring site. We investigated that further on the second study. With the next slide, please. The second study, conclusion similar. We did do some additional substances, so particulates, nitrogen dioxide, benzene, toluene, ethyl benzene, and xylenes were all within relevant standards. Hydrogen sulfide and toluene were both below World Health Organization limits. Because during the study, the monitor was moved, so the results were split. So between the 15th of January and the 12th of February, the level of hydrogen sulfide did exceed the odour threshold for 6% of the time. And between the 28th of February and 25th of June, it exceeded the odour threshold for 1% of the time, but importantly did remain below health levels. We did work with the local authority to find other sources to the north of the site using additional detectors, but those investigations did not conclusively find another source. Next slide, please. We did provide the results of both studies to Public Health England for their response. Their response is there on the slide. Public Health England did query the location of the monitor during the second study to query whether that was appropriate with regard to wind direction. And during the study, as I explained earlier, the wind direction was blowing towards the monitor over 50% of the time. So it's all on the slide there. So Public Health England said that they've assessed the environmental air quality data provided by the agency and compared it to World Health Organization levels, and they were satisfied with the study. And the next slide, please, which I'll also hand over now to Roger, please.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, we just thought it'd be useful now for everybody if I give a quick run through, a very brief run through of all the different types of engineering that happens at Walley's Quarry landfill, so that people get a feel for the vast amount of engineering works that do take place. So as wastes degrade, they obviously produce polluting substances known as leachate and landfill gas. If these substances escape in an uncontrolled manner, they can cause pollution of the environment or harm to human health. So therefore, we'll engineer landfills to contain the waste, collect and treat the contaminated water generated, which is called leachate, and to collect the gas generated from within the landfill. Next slide, please. All modern landfills have conditions in their environmental permits relating to engineering. This is the condition within the Walley's Quarry landfill permit. The agency's approach to landfill engineering, implemented through the permit condition, is to ensure that the environment is protected by preventing the uncontrolled releases of liquids and gases, that they are constructed using methods and materials that are fit for purpose and will provide a secure, stable environment for as long as the wastes have the potential to pollute, and that the construction works are undertaken to high quality assured standards. A process known as construction quality assurance is employed to ensure that this is the case, and the permit condition requires this to be applied to all landfill engineering, including landfill infrastructure such as gas wells and leachate wells. Next slide, please. When a site is permitted, a number of risk assessments are undertaken in order to demonstrate that the site will not pollute the environment. These include a hydrogeological risk assessment, a stability risk assessment, and a landfill gas risk assessment. These risk assessments are reviewed by our national permitting services when determining the EPR permit. The agency reviews the design proposals from the landfill containment system to ensure that what is built conforms to that modelled in the risk assessments. As I've previously said, that a process called construction quality assurance is employed to ensure that the containment system and all associated infrastructure is constructed to the highest standards. Construction quality assurance is a rigorous independent verification scheme which involves checking, testing and recording the procedures and materials used throughout the works to create a comprehensive record of the construction work to ensure that a high quality liner or landfill infrastructure is constructed. This process is carried out under the full-time supervision of an independent third-party engineer. Next slide, please. Any personnel involved in the CQA procedures must also be independent of the permit holder and financially independent of the construction contractor. The permit requires all construction quality assurance documents to be submitted to the agency for review, and no engineering works are allowed to start until the agency has confirmed that it is satisfied with the construction proposals, often referred to as a CQA plan, and waste cannot be tipped in the new cell until the agency has confirmed that it is satisfied with the CQA report. And the agency undertakes inspections when engineering works are in progress in order to check that the correct procedures and materials are being used. Walley's Quarry landfill is a former clay quarry that covers an area of approximately 23.5 hectares. The site is divided into 4 distinct areas called cells, which are engineered to contain the waste. Engineering work for landfill operations commenced in 2006, and waste was first accepted in Cell 1 in January 2007. Waste disposal operations have continued progressively in cells 1, 2, 3 and 4, with cell 4 becoming operational in 2011. Waste has now been deposited in all cells to varying depths, and all cells are currently operational and accepting waste. Next slide, please. The landfill base is around 85 metres above ordnance datum, and the final restoration height determined by the planning permission will be approximately 145 metres above ordnance datum, which is approximately 20 metres above existing ground level. The engineered lining system is constructed from approved sources of clay, which are used to line the base and sides of the landfill. The clay is bladed out into thin layers using a dozer and then compacted under the full-time supervision of an independent CQA engineer. The lining system to the base of cells 1 to 4 comprises a 3 metre thick engineered clay liner, whilst the lining systems to the side walls comprises a 1 metre thick engineered clay liner. Both are constructed to landfill directive standards. Permeability results achieved to date during the construction works have been better than the landfill directive requirement for a non-hazardous waste landfill. All the basal engineering has now been completed, along with a number of sections of the sidewall. This photo shows the construction of the basal liner in cell 3. Next slide, please. Each cell also has a leachate collection and extraction system comprising of 300mm gravel drainage layer together with collection pipework, a leachate collection point, a remote leachate monitoring point and a target pad to facilitate the retro drilling of any replacement leachate infrastructure such as extraction or monitoring wells should this be necessary. The site also has an on-site leachate treatment plant to treat the leachate generated at the site. These photos show the base of cell 3 nearing the end of construction, showing the drainage and collection system and the on-site leachate treatment plant. Next slide, please. The sidewall engineering will be progressively constructed in order to allow waste disposal operations to continue. The photos show engineering works to the cell 3 and cell 4 sidewall, which commenced earlier this year. We have visited the site a number of times to inspect the works to the sidewall in preparation for the next phase of waste deposition. During 2019, the sidewall liner was raised to existing ground levels along cell 1. And I've just said the sidewall liner is currently being raised to ground levels along cell 3 and the cell 4 sidewall. Completing the cell sidewall to existing ground levels will allow any temporary and permanent capping to be tied into it, helping avoid any emissions at the edge of the site and also improving gas capture in these areas. It will also allow waste levels to be raised in order to achieve the final restoration levels specified by the planning permission and ultimately allow the start of permanent capping at the site. The first phase of the works have now been completed and we have received a construction quality assurance report which we have reviewed and accepted. Waste deposition may now commence along these approved areas. Engineering work is continuing on the next phase of the sidewall to extend it southwards to the southern part of the site. Next slide, please. As well as engineering the base and the sidewalls, a landfill is also required to have an engineered cap, which is a liner over the top of the deposited waste. Walley's Quarry landfill will be capped to landfill directive standards. The permanent cap will either be a minimum 1 metre thick engineered clay layer compacted to achieve landfill directive standards, or an equivalent geosynthetic capping system overlain by 1 metre of restoration soils. As with the basal and sidewall lining works, a rigorous system of construction quality assurance will be implemented, supervised by an independent third-party engineer to ensure that the cap is installed to the highest standard. The engineered cap is installed to encapsulate the waste, prevent water entering the landfill and contain the landfill gases. The permanent cap is installed upon the completion of waste deposition in individual cells when waste levels reach the agreed restoration profile. No permanent capping has yet been installed at Walley's Quarry landfill, as the landfill has not yet reached the agreed restoration levels in any part of the site. However, a number of the areas have been temporary capped with a low permeability geomembrane liner, as shown in the photograph. in order to minimise the potential for any uncontrolled release of landfill gases and to improve gas collection. Approximately 25,000 metres squared of temporary capping was installed in 2019. Next slide, please. This drawing shows the extent of the temporary capping indicated on the previous photograph. This work was completed last year. The proposed strategy for the next phase of work is to temporary cap approximately half of the site by the end of 2020. This will further reduce the potential for odours and improve landfill gas collection. Next slide, please. The Landfill Directive requires that landfill gas is controlled by preventing its migration from a landfill and by collecting and treating or utilising the gas. This is delivered through a permit condition. The permit also contains a number of other conditions which specify the landfill gas monitoring requirements for the gas collection system, including the engines and flare, along with the gas wells and perimeter monitoring boreholes. Landfill gas is generated primarily as a result of microbial action on organic materials within the waste. However, there are also some gases released as a result of physical and chemical processes within the waste. Landfill gas is predominantly made up of a mixture of methane and carbon dioxide, typically 50 to 60% methane and 40 to 50% carbon dioxide. These are often referred to as bulk gases, and there are also a wide variety of trace components that comprise approximately 1% of the landfill gas, including hydrogen sulfide. The gas utilisation plant at Walley's Quarry landfill comprises 3 modern spark ignition engines, an enclosed high calorific flare with a capacity of 2,000 metres cubed per hour, and a 200 metres cubed per hour mobile flare. Each gas engine consumes 745 metres cubed of gas an hour when run at full capacity. So the total cumulative capacity of the gas plant, including the flares at the site, is over 4,000 metres cubed an hour. Landfill gas utilisation is currently carried out by continually running 2 gas engines, with the third on standby when one of the primary engines is off duty or being serviced. Currently, the gas utilisation plant is grid limited for power export. The agency understands that Red Industries are currently reviewing the options to increase export capacity to the grid. However, until a new grid connection becomes available, all excess gas will be flared. According to the latest landfill gas risk assessment, peak landfill gas production would reach 2,700 to 2,900 metres cubed an hour at the time of likely completion of waste disposal in 2024. The currently installed capacity of the gas plant therefore exceeds the maximum predicted gas generation rate. CLP and Envirogas operate the landfill gas collection system and the gas plant at the site on behalf of Red Industries. Next slide, please. The landfill gas collection system comprises an extensive collection of gas extraction wells drilled through the waste mass, into which perforated pipework is installed to collect the gas. The gas wells are typically drilled to no closer than 3 metres of the basal or sidewall lining system and are sealed at the surface to prevent air ingress and to prevent the escape of landfill gas. The gas wells are then connected to plain transmission pipe, which transfer the gas to the gas compound. The gas wells are generally installed with a spacing of approximately 30 to 40 metres so that landfill gas is drawn back towards the centre of the site. A survey is undertaken prior to drilling in order to establish existing ground levels in the location of the proposed gas wells. These are then compared with the as-built drawings for the underlying basal and sidewall lining system to ensure that the gas wells are not accidentally drilled through the liner. As with all other engineering works undertaken on site, a robust system of construction quality assurance is again employed when installing gas wells to ensure they are installed to the highest standards and the correct materials are used. Again, these works are supervised by an independent third-party construction quality assurance engineer. CLP, who are the landfill gas contractor, have 2 staff permanently present on site and an area manager in attendance as well for half the week. The amount of staff present can increase to 5 or 6 if there are infrastructure development works or similar to complete. The gas field is balanced once a week, with the strategic monitoring points of the gas field checked 3 times a week to assess if any additional balancing over and above this is required. Each gas well is inspected at the same time to check for defects and potential leaks. Any defects noted are repaired immediately or as soon as possible afterwards. The active gas extraction system is continually being upgraded as waste infill progresses. Additional or replacement gas wells are regularly installed as the gas system deteriorates through settlement, blockages and general wear and tear. When this and the installation of additional or supplementary collection pipe work becomes necessary, the work is undertaken in a phased manner.
Yeah.
Areas where the work is being carried out or are isolated from the rest of the gas field, and the work is carefully managed to minimise disruption to the field and keep the risk from increased emissions of landfill gas to an absolute minimum. 14 new gas extraction wells have been installed over the last 12 months, with a further, possibly minimum of 12, planned for the latter half of 2020. Collection efficiencies in the last 3 years have been high and above the target capture efficiency of 85% in agency guidance. The installation of 25,000 metres squared of temporary capping and 14 new gas wells in the last 12 months has meant that landfill gas capture has increased by approximately 25% during this time. Next slide, please. CLP undertake monthly surveys of the whole gas system with a flame ionisation detector to check for leaks from the gas collection system and to identify any uncontrolled surface emissions which may require additional intervention to either seal the surface or install additional gas collection wells. More frequent surveys are also undertaken if needed or a particular area requires further investigation. As part of our odour assessment work, the agency also undertake on-site monitoring with a portable handheld laser to validate the operator and CLP's monitoring. Next slide, please. The operator is also required to submit monthly gas field monitoring results to the agency under a permit condition, and these results are reviewed by the agency. Next slide, please. The permit also requires surface emissions monitoring to be undertaken. As with the surveys undertaken by CLP, a flame ionisation detector is used to measure the concentration of flammable gases, including methane, at the surface of the landfill. These are required to be undertaken on an annual basis and involve systematically traversing the site in small discrete zones in order to identify any surface emissions. During the survey, flammable gases are continuously monitored close to the surface of the landfill, along with any landfill gas or leachate infrastructure within the area. This is an example of a survey that was undertaken on the temporary capping installed on cell 1. The areas in yellow show areas where low but elevated readings were detected at the edge of the capping area. Remedial measures involving the placement of additional thickness of clay were then undertaken to reduce emissions and the area resurveyed to check the effectiveness of the work. Depending on the results, the remedial works are either assessed as being satisfactory or else further works are required. Next slide, please. In order to monitor the performance of the landfill and the effectiveness of its pollution control infrastructure, such as the lining system and landfill gas collection system, a comprehensive environmental monitoring regime is also required. Again, the monitoring requirements are specified in a number of permit conditions, and monitoring requirements include groundwater monitoring, gas monitoring, and leachate monitoring. The groundwater and gas monitoring is undertaken via a series of boreholes installed around the perimeter of the site, as shown on this drawing. Leachate monitoring is undertaken from wells installed within the waste, either constructed from the base of the site installed during construction of the cell, or wells drilled through the waste if the original wells become lost or damaged. We audit the condition of the monitoring points and review the data obtained from them. Monitoring, as we said earlier, will be required for quite a while, and possibly decades after the landfill has ceased accepting waste. Next slide, please. Just to summarise all the engineering works that have gone on site, in addition to containing the waste, collecting and treating the contaminated water and gases generated within the landfill, the previously mentioned engineering works are also important in controlling the odours from the landfill. Excluding the waste itself, uncontrolled emissions of landfill gas are potentially the other main source of odour on site, and these emissions can arise from lateral migration of the gas, from the active tipping area, uncapped active areas of the waste, capped areas, and leaks and failures in the gas collection system. The installation of an engineered clay liner and active gas extraction system are fundamental in controlling landfill gas odours from these areas. By further managing the size of the active tipping area and ensuring all waste and waste flanks are well covered, the potential for any gas and waste odours from these areas is further reduced. The implementation and enforcement of a comprehensive active monitoring regime to identify potential emission points and leaks from the gas extraction system and other landfill infrastructure further reduces this potential. The effectiveness of these measures are routinely monitored by the Environment Agency in order to ensure the procedures remain valid and that leaks or emissions are identified and rectified without delay. Whilst the depth of the quarry and the time taken to approach final restoration levels has meant that it has not been possible to install any capping to date, temporary capping in the form of an impermeable geomembrane has been installed on waste flanks for a number of years in order to minimise the potential for landfill gas and odour emissions, and also to aid landfill gas extraction. The rate of filling and current levels, which in parts of the site are now approaching final restoration levels, means that permanent capping will now be possible in the near future. Preparations are currently being made to temporarily cap a significant area of cells 1 and 3. Moving forward, as the amount of temporary and ultimately permanent capping increases, the areas from where uncontrolled emissions can occur will grow ever smaller, thereby reducing the potential for odour emissions. Whilst no system can ever be 100% effective, by constantly reviewing and improving these systems and procedures, the control measures implemented aim to approach this. Next slide. I think that's the end of the engineering section. I'll pass you over to Tim Lowe now.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah?
Yeah.
That's good. Right, then we can obviously talk about amenity nuisance issues at Walley's Quarry. Environment Agency officers carry out regular odour monitoring tours in the vicinity of the site. The tours can be undertaken any time of the day, ranging from early in the morning to late at night. Since 3rd July this year, we've completed 18 odour tours and detected odours on 11 occasions, but not at a level to be in breach of the permit. When officers undertake odour tours, they also record whether perhaps any other issues with the site, whether it's mud on the road, any dust nuisance from the landfill. We also record whether there are any birds flying above the site or perching on adjacent buildings. The environmental permit held by the operator requires them to use management systems to prevent or at least minimise environmental impact from the site regarding the above nuisance issues. Next slide, please. Right, we just talk about the odour monitoring tours. They're conducted at a number of locations, and we also take into account any recent complaints we've had to ensure these locations are also included in the tour. When officers detect a landfill type odour during the tour, they record the type of odour. For example, is it a gassy smell or smell of fresh or rotting waste? The officer gives it an odour strength as well, ranging from 0, which is no odour, to 6, which would be an extremely strong odour. Often, as part of our odour assessments, we use a portable handheld laser, a Geotech TDL 500. The laser is specifically calibrated to detect methane rather than general flammable gases at parts per million, very, very small parts. This meter helps us determine whether any landfill gas perhaps is escaping from the site that could cause an odour problem. Next slide, please. That's just a straightforward picture, obviously, of the monitor and a gentleman on the right using that. I think actually that's Roger P. So that's the Environment Agency. Next slide, please. Right then. We've continued to conduct odour tours during COVID-19. We'd obviously had to undertake these in the strict line with the government guidance. Our odour tours are determined by the location and frequency of the complaints. And after the tour, we contact the Walley's Quarry landfill site operators with our findings. And often officers also visit the site after a tour to meet with the operator. The Environment Agency requires the operator to manage odours on site in accordance with its odour management plan. So we really need to carry out investigations into any odour we detect and report back to us. The operator is also required to use best available technique, or BAT. This is to manage the site to ensure that its waste operations on site prevent or at least minimise odour potential. Next slide, please. We work with our partner organisations and we share the information we gather from odour tours with our partner organisations. For example, when officers detect a non-landfill type odour, they inform Newcastle and Lyme Borough Council, and this allows somebody like the council to carry out their own investigations in the area. We also hold regular telecoms with our partner organisations, and we attend and inform others at site liaison meetings. We continually review and update information through our community links and on SharePoint. This ensures that all our customers receive up-to-date information. And where appropriate, we also distribute information via email or post. We really do try and cover every possibility to make sure customers get a good delivery and service from the Environment Agency. Next slide, please. Odour tours are very important to us as a regulator because it allows us to gather information. And it helps us ensure that the operator complies with its environment permit. It's important that our customers report any odours that affect their daily lives by using our instant hotline, which is 0800 80 70 60. With all complaints, the Environment Agency provides feedback for those who request it. We never give away any complainants' details. And we hope as COVID-19 restrictions are eased, we'll go back to meeting the complainants face to face where they want that opportunity, and perhaps meet them at the location of the odour where they felt unhappy about, whether it's at the home or near to the home. Hopefully, like I said, we can get back to that after 19 restrictions are being lifted. Next slide, please. We now move on to mud on the highway. Obviously, all landfill sites have potential to cause nuisance, with vehicles using the site and leaving mud deposits at the site entrance and on the highway. At Walley's Quarry, there are a number of measures in place to minimise nuisance from mud and make sure that the operator complies with its permit. For instance, vehicles using the site must go through a wheel wash facility before leaving. There's a couple of photos there just showing the vehicle. Have the next slide, please. We can continue with that theme. Obviously, fortunately, the site also has a long exit road, which helps dry vehicles after they've been through the wheel wash and before they leave the site. Next slide, please. And again, more mud on the road continued. At the moment, the operator is also using a concrete waste transfer unloading pad within the site, and this minimises vehicles travelling on muddy site roads. You can see that the operator uses a road sweeper to keep the site entrance and adjacent highway clean. Have the next slide, please. Thank you. We're moving on to dust nuisance. The operator is required to know when potentially dusty waste loads are going to arrive on site, and this enables the operator to handle dusty loads specifically to minimise nuisance. Dusty loads are carefully handed and covered over as quickly as possible. The operator uses an on-site water bowser to dampen down dust on site roads and working areas during dry weather, and also there are vehicle speed restrictions on site to minimise dust disturbance from vehicle movements. Next slide, please. Nuisance from birds. During the operational life of the site, obviously, we have received public complaints regarding bird nuisance, and it's usually gulls. The operator is, of course, required to deploy methods, which it's detailed in its pest management plan, to deter birds from staying on site and scavenging on the waste. We accept that birds can cause nuisance to surrounding properties by flying over buildings, perching on house roofs, and can cause fouling nuisance to buildings, pavements and cars. And that's why we work with partner organisations to help to achieve a coordinated approach for bird control to minimise nuisance off-site. Next slide, please. Current bird control measures used on the site include the use of bangers. Some residents will have heard those in use. They've also used birds of prey to scare gulls away, and they also ensure that waste is properly covered as quickly as possible when it's received on site. We operated various control measures to stop the birds becoming familiar with control techniques. And in June 2020, June this year, the Environment Agency carried out an audit review of the operator's management system procedures used to control birds on site. And we produced an inspection report which made a number of recommendations to further improve bird control measures on Walley's Quarry landfill site. The operator has incorporated these recommendations into their procedures. Obviously, that's a photo of a bird, one of the birds of prey that's used to deter gulls from settling on the site. Next slide, please. Incident reporting. The Environment Agency takes each incident report it receives very seriously, and we will investigate incident reports as a regulator to achieve the best outcome. It's important our customers contact us on our free phone incident hotline number, which again is same as before, 0800 80 70 60. And they should do that as soon as they experience an odour that affects their daily lives. This helps us make the right response. The incident line obviously operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we always ask our customers to use that line and not directly contact an Environment Agency officer. And this ensures that we pick up a report properly and covers the officer when they might be on leave. So it's important to use the hotline, 24 hours a day. It's available 7 days a week on that free phone number. Next slide, please. Now, when you report an incident to the Environment Agency, you can request feedback. If you don't request that, we won't normally come back to you, but we will try and provide that within 10 days if you do ask for feedback. Reports received by an incident hotline are passed to a duty officer within 30 minutes. Obviously, the only exception is overnight, when odour complaints are normally passed to an officer in the morning. The operator is informed about all incident reports, but really importantly, we don't release personal data. So the operator doesn't know, or our partners don't know, who the complainant is or where they live. And we ask the operator, or we require the operator to investigate the incident and to advise us of any resulting changes in their operations which may have contributed towards any complaints. Next slide, please. Communications engagement. We attend, obviously, liaison meetings, which is quarterly. We've got a community newsletter, which is distributed to members of the public. We've got a citizen space information page, and there's also an external web page. We've also got a landfill frequently asked questions, which I think is very helpful to our customers. And we will respond to written inquiries regarding information and complaints. And also we've got a couple of links there on the slide and an overview of our coronavirus response details and also some site details. I think that brings that to a close, if I'm right. Yeah. So thank you for listening.
Okay. Thank you, Tim. Chair, as you can see, a very comprehensive presentation. I think it was important we got into the detail of some of our regulation. We're now happy to take any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that presentation. I think there's a lot for us to think about there, and I'd also like to thank you for making sure that the presentation, as we asked, was specific to Walley's Quarry rather than generic, and I think you've done that, so thank you very much for doing that for us. There are no doubt many questions from members of the committee. If I may perhaps kick off with a few, just to clarify some of the issues about the reporting of waste and such like. And I've had my ear bent by Alderman Derek Huckfield about some of these things, and I think it is important that we get questions that are being bounced around cleared up. So am I right in saying that EA officers will go out both in the day and the night to monitor these sorts of incidents? And if they do, am I right in thinking that's when they'll be using this, was it TDL 500 monitor?
I think perhaps, Tim Lowe speaking, I think I perhaps need to clarify that slightly in the sense that just to discuss the TDL monitor, that is used, I would say, not held in by each officer that goes out for an odour complaint, and that's perhaps used occasionally, perhaps fortnightly on a tour. When we respond to an odour complaint, which we can do late at night, early mornings, we do vary the tours, so we've not got a set time of day. We tend just to use the general, obviously we travel to the areas of locations where the complaints may have come from, and we basically do an assessment using our own sense of odour, if you like, smell. And then we rate that as clearly as we can, 0 to 6 on the scale I described earlier.
Okay, so that interests me in the sense that what you're saying is essentially you're relying on your own sense of smell to calibrate these results. Is that correct?
when we do an odour tour, obviously we've got experienced officers carrying out the tours. It's not just myself. We've got several other officers, and we do what we think is as reasonable and realistic assessment as the odour as possible. Obviously, we do pick up other odours, whether it's fresh cut grass or cooking smells if it's an evening tour. We try and record those as accurately as possible. Yes.
Okay, so I mean, my question, if I may, and then I'll open it up to other people. I'd just like to sort of finish this off. Cap it, one might say, is how, I mean, these are the orders you score from 1 to 6. That's correct. Yeah. Yeah. How good is that if you're placed in a position of a formal inquiry or something like that? After all, people's senses of smell vary. A meter could pick up a quantifiable datum. So how robust is that sort of system of reporting, would you say?
I accept there will be some variance between officers. I think that's obvious, but it is surprising how accurate it is between different officers, even when they've gone out in pairs. And that's not being influenced by the other officer presence. We try and keep this really realistic. I think we can only say it comes down to personal experience. The team involved, the officers involved, are very experienced in landfill, and I think we try and give as realistic odour assessment as we can.
Okay, and could you, I mean, would that stand up for, say, legal scrutiny? Can you give us any examples of where that sort of worked out okay?
I can't personally, whether I can put that out to other officers present at the scrutiny.
Just to add as well, the permit conditions specifically require the Environment Agency officer to substantiate the odour at a level of annoyance. So I can understand why you feel, should we use a monitor? But the conditions specifically odour substantiated at a level of annoyance for a pollution by Environment Agency officer. So that is the condition. It has stood up to scrutiny. There have been cases the agency's taken in relation to odour when officers have substantiated odour off-site at a level of annoyance. Like Tim said as well, we have different officers that go. So that does help us to, change that sensitivity of different officers. And we do go out at the same time. We go out separate to different areas and meet afterwards to compare our findings. So that's why the use of the monitor actually helps us detect maybe more low-level odours that maybe we wouldn't pick up. So the monitor in some ways helps to calibrate what we're finding.
Okay. So I obviously don't want to hog questions, so I just ask my colleagues if there's anything there. So Councillor Rout, I think you'll have to unmute yourself, Councillor.
Okay, I should be unmuted now. I wanted to ask a question about the monitor as well, and forgive me because I am far from a scientist. But I think you said that the monitor picks up methane, is that right?
Yes, it's parts per million. I wonder actually if my colleague Roger P might be better positioned to answer that question. Are you okay with that, Roger?
Yeah, the laser we use, it's specific to methane and nothing else.
But you also mentioned that an example of an odorous gas was hydrogen sulfide.
That's right, yeah.
So the monitor doesn't pick up one of the possible odorous gases that are emitted from the landfill. No,
the monitor that we've got is purely for methane. We're just using that as a, I think like Tim said, that if you can smell something like that and you're picking up methane, it's used as like a surrogate marker substance that might be within the odour. Obviously, the air quality monitor that we had set up was specifically looking at that hydrogen sulfide levels.
And again, not a scientist, but I have a nose. Just as a comment, I can tell the difference, I think, between malodours that emit from the landfill and the smell of methane. They're not the same thing.
Methane is odourless, so you wouldn't smell methane. But the thought behind it is that if you can smell something that you think's either waste or gas related, if you're picking it up with your nose, but you're also detecting some on the monitor, that might give you extra confidence that the landfill is the source.
So could you monitor other malodorous gases that potentially are emitted from the landfill with tech?
I think there are monitors, but I'm not sure. I don't think the agency have got them, not personal monitors.
Thank you.
That's where we rely upon our use of our noses for the malodorous ones. monitor, as Roger explained, picks up methane, which is one of the major components of landfill gas, which you can't smell. So we use almost our own noses for monitoring the malodorous ones, and the use of the monitor is useful for picking up those low levels of methane.
Could I ask about this sort of is about nuisance, but on to some degree perhaps both odour and the bird question that's been mentioned. The capping of this site. Now, am I correct in saying that the site will be capped with a temporary cap every evening when working is finished? Would that be a?
It has what we refer to as daily cover rather than a temporary cap. A temporary cap is something, I say, semi-permanent, that's there, where an area of the site which is maybe completed, no waste is going to go into for some time without a temporary cap. At the end of every working day, you would have something called daily cover. That usually can be some waste, so it's usually either waste soils or sometimes it's waste fines, and that's the fines, as we explained, that are shredded waste from transfer stations. Okay,
so that will cover, and I'm trying the techno to do put me straight if I go wrong. So this daily covering would have waste visible in it. Would that be correct? Which would potentially attract birds, or should it in fact be devoid of such material?
You could see waste in it because it can be waste material that's sometimes used for cover, but you wouldn't want it really to be material that birds would have something to scavenge on. So that's why earlier in March we did require the operator to change the use of cover to increasingly use soils.
Okay, so that's going back. So you anticipate my next question, which was, I think you did talk about the cover material being poor within the presentation. So that presumably is a reference to March. Have checks been done that's been improved since? Yeah, we have. Since there's certain things that every time we go on site that we'll look at, and whether waste is covered on some areas which are no longer being used is something we'd regularly look at. During one of our recent visits, we took the monitor on site as well, and we did monitor some of the areas which had a more, I'd say, temporary capping or permanent capping on there, and we did monitor from there to see if we picked up any gas emissions. There was one area of the site there, near Gardeners Garden Centre, where there was we're talking levels of 1% methane, still very low, and the operators applied some additional material over there. The next time myself and Roger are on site, we'll be taking the monitor back to check the effectiveness of that as well. And would you say that if the cover is put down correctly, that should alleviate the number of birds flocking to the site or gathering around the site, however one wishes to describe that? It's certainly one of the measures that is used to deter birds. It in itself is not going to be the only measure to deter birds from the landfill. As Tim explained, there's many other measures as well. And the landfill operator is required to stop birds scavenging on the landfill and deter them. But obviously that does mean that they will sit outside the site, and they will also seek food sources as well, be that bins and takeaways, etc. as well. So they will be attracted to try to find food elsewhere. Councillor Reddish, sorry, I don't see on my screen the little hand thing. I don't know if we can implement the little hand thing.
I can't get it up, that's why. I'm not quite sure why, but I'll fiddle with that in a minute. I suppose from where I sit, where I live, I have no doubt that your presentation was correct, and I'm not challenging it in any way. But the bottom line is that as councillors, we have complaints about odour fairly regularly. I was going to say daily, but perhaps certainly weekly. I can't see in your presentation anywhere where it tells me where there's an acceptable amount of odour impact in your eyes. I mean, what is that acceptable amount on the community? And how do you model that, and how do you assess it? Because my experience when you ring us up is that the questioner will say to you, your scale of 1 to 6. Now, what is 5 to 1 might be 3 to another. So I'm basically asking what you think is a considerable or an acceptable amount of odour that residents should be experiencing, because it is quite foul on occasions. I accept it's not a health issue, but nevertheless it does cause headaches and dizziness and nausea and everything else that they report, which is unacceptable as a resident. So how can you help us with that? And how, I mean, are you saying that we have to accept it and there's nothing that can be done about it? Is there any more that you can do?
I think we've always
Is there any
said
more we can do?
no landfill is going to ever be odour free. Just by the activities they take, there's a potential to cause odour from a landfill site. The level at which we deem, if we deem there is a level of odour that we consider to be a level of 3 out of 6 off-site, then we would consider that to be a level which could cause pollution, is the term the permit uses. Part of our permit condition then also requires us to go on site and determine whether the site's using all appropriate measures to prevent that. So as we said in March, we were actually 3 of us were out on, and we determined that there was a level 3, which we determined was a level which could cause annoyance. And then the site visit was undertaken to determine what the measures were the company taking appropriate measures or not. It was actually a waste odour that we detected off-site, more of a fresh waste odour. And then we visited the site, and that's where the company did review the procedure, the types of material used in cover. So to answer your question, hopefully, yes, there's a scale of 0 to 6. It's a level of 3 that we would consider as a level could cause annoyance, and then we would visit the site whether they're taking appropriate measures or not. The questions and regarding health impacts isn't something we could comment on. I think that would have to be taken to either Public Health England, and we would always, if they've got concerns, to visit. Okay.
Councillor Jones, unless Councillor Rachel had a follow-up there, I don't want to.
No.
In that case, Councillor Jones, you need to unmute yourself, Councillor.
I'm quite happy if Councillor Reddish has a follow-up to follow on. I don't know if Marion had a follow-up.
No, not really. I might have another question, but you carry on, Dave Jones.
I've got a bit of a follow-up from Marion's question, or the answer to that question. Public Health England in your slide said that this could be causing a mental health issue due to the presence of odour over a continued period of time. That's actually in your slides. But my question sort of leading on from that, and I've got a couple of questions, so I'll ask the simple ones with a yes or no answer, I guess. When you said that the odour has to be verified under permit by an environmental health officer, does that say that it requires nasal detection of that odour, or can it be substantiated by an officer through another detection method? It's the first one.
This is by an officer, so it is by us ourselves detecting it, and not by a mechanical method. We can use that, but ultimately it's got to be by the view of an agency officer, so it has to be us.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be by nasal detection.
It's perceived by an agency officer,
okay.
So yes, by nasal detection to do that. Use of a monitor would support that if we were going to take any further action, but it has to be us detecting it by ourselves.
Secondly, you mentioned 3 being the threshold. How many times in the last 24 months has an officer detected an above 3 when they visited the site?
We've scored a breach of the permit in the last, I'm going to go back to the January 2019. We've detected a level off-site and scored a breach of the permit on 1 occasion. There have on some odour tours, which have been out of hours, when obviously we haven't then visited the site. We have also detected over above 3 on some occasions, but I don't have the number for that. Obviously we can't visit the site out of hours, and we have to do that to be able to actually determine whether there's a breach of the permit or not.
Okay, but it would be useful for us to know how many times on these odour tours you have detected a 3 or above, whether or not you've had chance to visit the site. When residents make a complaint, it helps with being able to reassure residents that when environmental agency officers have attended, they've detected it to also be above the threshold in your determination?
We have that
Just-
information. When we send our summaries of our tours back to the site, we send that back with the levels, so we will have that. Unless number, I don't know if we have, but have you got the number at all?
If we don't have that to hand, Chair, Councillor will be able to provide that for you after the meeting.
I'd be very grateful if you could do that. One other question I think that might be interesting here for all of us talking about these numbers is this might be a very unpleasant experience, but is there any way that members of this committee could be sort of exposed to, trained to detect this level themselves? I mean, what does a number 3 smell like, so to speak? It's not easy to imagine that. It would be quite useful in some ways to, you know, if there's a test tube with such an odor in or whatever, if it could be shared, so that we would know.
I'm not sure.
About at that level.
I'm not sure if that exists. I suppose the only way to get, if you like, a number 3 odor or number 4 or 5 as we get stronger would be to be very directly on a landfill, very close to a waste where it's being tipped or deposited, or a leachate well or somewhere like that. So it's not something I think that can be picked up easily, expertise wise, on a normal basis. But I suppose that the only way is to actually be on a landfill and very directly in, if you like, proximity to that sort of potential odour.
Something should be there. It's like persistent as well. Very often you might get an odour for a few seconds or a few minutes, and so that's also a consideration of a level of 3 out of 6 odour, a persistent odour. It's something you want to move away from. It is quite hard to describe. There are courses that you can do that. There are ones of calibrated nose courses that people do. People could be trained to detect that, but ultimately it still has to be the agency officer that odour for us to determine compliance with the permit condition. That might be something, if we pick up an odour at a 3 out of 6, that we may be able to contact someone to do that in the future. Might be a way to try to do that.
Thank you. That's useful. Before I ask Councillor Rout to speak, if I could just pick up on one thing you said, Dennis, if I may. How does the EA define persistent in terms of time?
The guidance requires you to be at a point monitoring odour for 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
We're doing odour assessments and we record them. The minimum spend at a point is 10 minutes. Okay,
thank you very much. Councillor Rout, then I think Councillor Jones will need to speak. And I think both councillors will have to unmute themselves, and then Councillor Reddish.
Again, forgive me for not being a scientist. On the subject of us understanding what objectively a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 is, perhaps we could accompany you one time on one of your tours to see if our noses correlate. But also I'd be very interested to see when you go out because of a complaint, whether your data correlates with the data that the complainant has made. So if someone rings in and says a 6, is that anything like what's picked up by the team who go out when they go out to visit? And I have another question, but I think it's on a slightly different topic, so I'll give way to Councillor Jones if that's okay.
Would you like me just to answer that, the points you just made there? Obviously, when we go out on an odour tour, there's going to be some different perceptions with the, if you like, the person who's made the complaint on how strong the odour is. We try and be realistic, and because an odour is sometimes transient, we always work on the basis that to that person, they actually picked up an odour that they obviously found very upsetting. The important thing I think I would say is that we often find that complainants or people who report the incidents report them later than when they, if you like, picked up the nuisance, and that can be some hours later or even the following day. And as I said in the slides, what we're going to try and do, and hopefully we will achieve it once COVID-19 restrictions are lifted, we will try and meet complainants again as soon as we can after they've made the complaint. So at least we're there, not to say they're wrong or right, it's just to verify what they're smelling and try and just to talk to them about what's happened.
So apologies, I don't think you quite answered the question, which was, do your scores correlate with the complainant's scores?
I suppose if a complainant said it was a very strong odour, we would probably agree it's a very strong odour. Again, it's a personal, I suppose, the ability to pick up an odour comes into this, but we've never, if somebody says it's a very strong odour, I always work on the assumption they're right. To them, it's a strong odour and it's causing them nuisance. It's causing them personally an upset.
So have the officers who visited ever scored the odour as a 6?
At this site, no. I think from other sites, it's not unusual. I think very often if a resident said it was a 6, we'd probably say it was a little bit lower, and a site operator would probably say it's lower than that. So no, we haven't picked up an odour at a level of 6 at this site. Generally, as Tim said, if that's what the residents reported, I'm sure that's what they were experiencing. But we haven't picked that up at this site in the talk.
Thank you, Chair. Just coming in there. I suppose I am a scientist in many different ways, and I find it quite astonishing that we're reliant on a biological detection method that we know accommodates for smell anyway. Your entire detection of odorant accommodates based on the intensity of the smell, when there are handheld H2S monitors readily available, relatively cheap, that could correlate against a well-known value from the WHO value, which has been reported in the odour monitoring report. And that kind of leads into my question about the odour monitoring report. I noticed in the presentation it says that there was a breach of the 7 microgram limit. I think it's 7 micrograms, 1% of the time. That's if you assume over the entire measuring period, where actually in the same report it says out of the 118 days, for 26 of those days, there was a breach in the limits in the 30-minute monitoring windows. So that's 22% of the time. So 22% of the days monitored, there was a breach in the limit at a point on those days. 5% of the days monitored, that breach in the limit was actually double the WHO value. So within your own monitoring report, where you had these mobile H2S detectors, you've picked up breaches in the odour, which probably, I suspect, would correlate against complaints. I just find it absolutely astonishing that this is entirely based on olfactory detection, when there's a very simple way of getting a firm value reading that could then be correlated against complaints. We've already just discussed, what's a 3 compared to Councillor Fear's detection of a 3, Councillor Reddish's detection of a 3, Councillor Wright's detection of a 3. Both myself and Councillor Reddish have worked in healthcare. A 3 to us is possibly much higher than a 3 to Councillor Wright. But if we were using a monitor with readily available WHO values, we would know when it breaches the WHO value. We could say it's above 7. We detected it with this monitor and it was above 7. It just astonishes me that all of this is based, and I'm sorry, I am going to go back to this. If it says verified by an officer, unless it says nasal detection, verified by an officer could be with a handheld device. As long as the officer verifies that, the method of testing that, unless specified, I suspect is open. So I really cannot get beyond this nasal detection. To the scientist in me, it makes absolutely zero sense whatsoever when there's a readily available way of correlating that.
The conditions perceived by an agency officer, and I think as Steve explained, we have to work within the legislation and the guidance we have, and that is that it is an agency officer that has to complete that assessment. There is no scope for us to do the permit compliance solely using a monitor. We can use it to support our own monitoring, which is what we do. To determine whether or not there is a breach of the permit, it has to be an agency officer, and the condition is received by an agency officer. So that's why we have to use ourselves, and that's why we use different officers and not just one at a time. to get to partly to help the fact that we detect it differently. I get your point. There are monitors out there. We have personal monitors that we use when we go to the site that do pick up H2S from health and safety point of view. But we can't use that for compliance with the permit. The legislation does not allow that.
Councillor Reddish.
My question is going back to complaints stroke site visit. When you receive a complaint, how quickly is it before you go to the site to see whether that complaint is true or not? And do you just go to the site, or do you go to neighbouring areas? Because it is possible, and I've experienced this, where smell has been quite strong where I live, and I've literally got in my car and 3 minutes later got down to the quarry and it's not half as strong, and vice versa because of the chances. So when you get your complaint from somebody in, I'm going to say Thesbury because that's where I represent, do you go into Thesbury and say, yes, you're right, or no, you're not, or whatever, or do you just go to the site?
When we carry out the odour tour, we cover several areas. If I give you a typical example, if I was going out, let's say we had a complaint in Thistlebury as a starter. As I leave, obviously I leave home, head towards the area. I would probably come in by the Keel Road. I'd cover the adjacent roads to that, Orme Road. I'd move forward towards the site, towards the Keel roundabout. I would cover, the new housing estate, Gadwell, Croft, Gallingale, down to Snow Goose, swing back round, go back towards again the Keel roundabout, taking a right towards Cemetery Road. Trying to put a map in my head here, Marion, doing my best. We come past the site, we've got the site entrance, we've got Mary's Way on the left, we move forward to Silverdale traffic lights. You take a left up towards the racecourse, you'd come back towards the traffic lights, move north towards...
Hey, Tim, I'm just going to stop you. I've got
that. We cover an area, if you like, but
it's not far enough, because all those areas you say are relatively close to the quarry, and actually the smell is further out. I mean, as the road flows, I might live quite close, but it's not an area that you've just quoted. So do you need to widen your site visits to cover areas that are not quite so close to the quarry?
I take on board your comments. I think we cover quite a comprehensive area, and I understand why you think it's nearer perhaps than the larger area that you're thinking of, and I understand that. The odour's transient, we know that. It does move about, and I think realistically we also take into account wind direction, which is vital. And we cover, I think, quite a reasonable area for what we do. But I take on board we could expand that. I suppose you're thinking more towards Newcastle town centre.
Well, no, I'm not actually. I'm thinking more towards Paris Avenue estate.
Okay, right.
Certainly, I've been in Keel Road and not smelt it, but I've been in Renfrew Close where I live it, and it's actually quite strong because of wind direction or whatever. We do
cover Geneva, Paris, and take into account the wind direction to see if it's affected that. Because obviously we've had complaints from Paris Avenue areas, Geneva Drive. So we do cover.
I only quote as examples.
Oh yeah, well, I mean we try and do a reasonable area, and I think it's quite a wide area. But yeah, it is transient. It does appear, as we know, Sainsbury's, Newcastle town centre, it goes past the Westlands. It's just trying to judge at that time where it can be.
I'm going to finish in a minute, Councillor Fear, but is there any possibility of any monitoring equipment in people's gardens or whatever, whether it be in Keel or wherever, and say, this is what we smelt on such and such a day, here's your evidence? Or does the monitoring all have to be at the quarry? And that's my final question.
Would anybody like to answer that to the colleagues?
I think it comes back to saying that ultimately us as officers to determine that odour. As Tim said, we do also look at where the complaints come from. So we have complaints, those are the locations that we'd look to go and visit. If we've had areas that we haven't had complaints on before, then recently we included those in the checks that we went and did. So the complaints we receive are partly what we use our intelligence to decide where to go to. The monthly tours we were doing around using the monitor as well, That was collecting, that was about 100 different locations that we go to in a 2-hour walk around. So no fixed area. There are probably fixed areas that we normally go to, but then we would also look at where the complaints are coming from. You asked about how quick we go out. As Tim said, sometimes complaints could be considerable time after we've received them. After someone detected the odour. So we also look at when people have detected odour, when they say, and we try to target our checks those then as well. Pretty much before every site visit, to be honest as well, we'll go around and do an odour tour. So we go around and do odour checks separately, but pretty much before each site visit. And we're coming in from different directions, so we will stop at different areas and do checks on our way as well, so from many locations.
Councillor Rout, I think, and then Councillor Jones again.
Thank you, Chair. I absolutely agree with Marion, and I'm not sure we quite got the answer on whether people could have monitoring equipment provided that they could use in their own gardens or around their houses. But I've got a couple more questions. Forgive me if I missed it, but I can't recall seeing anything about the number of complaints in the slides.
I've got figures, if you just bear with me on that one. That's fine, right there. That's in the notes.
Up on the monitoring equipment, we don't have and we don't provide monitoring equipment to individual residents. We have the monitoring trailer that we've used previously to do the 2 monitoring exercises, and currently we're not intending to do any further monitoring.
Could that be something that could be a conversation with Red then, to see if they might be prepared to provide some equipment to residents?
So yeah, if you want, you can ask that to the company.
And then complaints was the other question, if you've managed to find them.
I've got that, yeah. If we go back to, should we say, June this year, June was 53 complaints for the month, July 79, August 95, and September the spike to 318.
And do you analyse those complaints? Do you look across them to see, are they all about dust? Are they all about odour? Are they all about traffic?
Yes, we do, yeah, we do.
Could I ask you, do you grade them as well? So in other words, when we get this sliding scale of 1 to 6 or whatever, do you look at those complaints and say most of these seem to be sort of 3 or 4, or most of these seem to be 1 or 2? And in general, would you? I don't know this because you manage many of these sites or have oversight of many of these sites. Would you say the Walley's Quarry site generates an average number of complaints, a higher than average, a lower than average number of complaints?
Just to mention the rating, obviously, first, I'll answer that one. When a complaint reporter calls us, obviously, with an odour complaint, our incident room will ask them if they can rate it out of 6, and obviously just discuss that with them, say give it a personal rating. I don't personally look at the complaints and think I'm going to rate it because I'm not there at the time. I understand that report that's come in, the person who's made it is obviously, I accept it on face value. It causes them a lot of distress. If it's a 6, if it's a 2, it might just be a very transient odour they pick up. That's a bit of a question I can answer on that one. What was the other part? Sorry.
But it will be. Do you log them? I mean, in other words, when you look at this, do you count the numbers of 2s, 3s, and 4s? And my other question was, how does Walley's Quarry rate vis-a-vis complaints as regards other sites that you have oversight of?
Sorry, Sarah, I'll let you answer that one, please. Yeah.
We don't necessarily count 2s, 3s, and 4s. I think we consider every complaint. So every complaint is reviewed from, and then we'll do our checks accordingly. Where does it sit? The site receives a high number of odour complaints. Sometimes that's one of the higher, sometimes it's not. So generally it is one of the maybe top 20 sites that receive a number of odour complaints nationwide. It's not always been the highest, it has been on a couple of occasions.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rout wanted to finish, and then maybe Councillor Jones. Sorry, Mrs. Dennis. Do you want to add to what you just said? I don't cut you off.
When I say about number of complaints, that's not just landfills. That's probably all industries. So we do regulate other, be that slaughterhouses, rendering plants as well. So that's comparing them to all processes.
Sorry, Councillor Chair, we can provide you with a summary of the complaints over the last year or 2 years if that would help you.
That would be very useful. I'd be very grateful.
So I'm going to ask two questions in quick succession. I realise I'm hogging a little bit, so I'll stop after that. So the first was, I don't think you answered whether that you looked at any pattern in the data. And the second was, did you just say that it was sometimes in the top 20 for the number of complaints? And if you did, how many are in that list? Is it 30, 400, 4,000?
The list, I'll tell that one, that's the easier one, and the list would consider all the sites that the agency regulates. So you're talking, that could be hundreds of sites, but many sites don't have the potential to cause odour. We regulate power station wise as well. So they wouldn't, but we regulate anaerobic digestion plants. I can't give you an exact number on that. That's a review of our incident reporting system to see how many complaints have been received from individual sites on a monthly basis. And this is one that has appeared in the list of towards the top down. Analysing complaints, we have looked at where the complaints have been from before, look at the hot spots and areas, and then regularly we look at that to decide where to go. So we do analyse where they are. Complaints generally, I would say generally, and not for this site, generally for most sites from local residents would come in as a level of threat. I've not had many sites where we receive complaints that are of a level of 1, 2, 3. That just generally that is how generally complaints are received by across the board sites. But we don't take any complaint, whether it's a 1 or a 6, any differently. We treat them all seriously.
Councillor Jones, I think.
Thank you. I think one of the issues we have is that this odour can be quite transient, so it can come along very, very, very strong and last maybe 12 to 24 hours. It can be very strong down in Silverdale, and then a couple of hours later it can be very strong up in Keele. It does move and also is transient. So I think in terms of my understanding, if I'm a resident and I've called you, I'm a resident in Silverdale, close to the site, and I call you at midday, or say 2 o'clock, let's say 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and complain about the odour, how soon from that phone call at 2 o'clock is it likely that somebody would come to evaluate whether that odour is really at that level?
The complaint goes past from our incident support centre to us within 30 minutes, so we'd know about it. We don't go out in response to every single complaint. If we did decide to go out, that would be somebody local that would go, so they could be there within an hour. We have been, when we're on site, and even when we're doing odour tours, normally we'd actually tell the officer, colleagues, we could check on the system, if any complaints did come in, we'd actually be able to go to those locations even quicker. We've been on site before, stood outside a residential property where someone did report an odour of 6 out of 6, and we had them with us, and that was 3 agency officers, and we didn't pick anything up on that occasion. So we try to attend as quick as we can, but then, as I said, we'll also then target the checks we do to the times that we're receiving complaints and from the locations that we're in them as well.
Just to follow that up slightly, if you're going from site to a reported site of the odour, you presuming that the odour is originating from site, you've just gone from the epicentre to a second location, and again the aforementioned olfactory accommodation, unless you're flushing your nasal system, you've already accommodated to the intense smell, so you're now going somewhere else to try and detect
it's the other when we go to do a site visit, we will do our odour assessments before we go to site. So we'll do that before we arrive on site. Officers come in, often there's 2 people visit the site together, they come from different directions, they'll do their own odour assessments, and then we will go to site. We have to detect an odour. If there is an odour complaint, we have to detect the odour off site at a level of annoyance and go on site to determine if the site's taking appropriate measures. For exact reasons that you've said, we would not go to a site first and then go and do an odour assessment. We would do the odour assessment first.
So if you'd already visited the site and you had a call, you wouldn't then go and do an odour assessment?
Well, we would sometimes. We have to consider, just the points that you've said. We have actually been on a landfill site, but then, we may not have picked up any odour while we've been on that landfill site either. So like you say, we may not be affected by detect odours off site. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't.
Okay. So I guess that kind of leads into my second question on that, is that if you receive a complaint about an odour, you're saying that you don't substantiate all complaints. I can understand that because of the volume of complaints. So what thresholds do you determine on whether you're going to visit a site or not? How much time does this take? Because I've rung up at 2 o'clock. I'm a resident who's quite distressed because of the smell of the odour. If it's not being substantiated within 6 hours of that, then it's likely that the odour might have passed. And then I ring up again 3 days later with an odour again. And if it's not substantiated within 6 hours, it's likely the odour's passed. And you can almost see a cycle occurring that some residents who might be actively reporting this, it's not getting substantiated, and that would cause a concern. So I suppose what you've said is 30 minutes to transfer, and then you've mentioned a process to determine whether you do or do not visit. That then adds another time delay onto that. I just would like to know what kind of threshold you apply to whether you decide to visit or not.
There is no absolute threshold. It's using the complaints you've received and reviewing that. The most time a complaint takes to get to us is within 30 minutes. And then we would be deciding whether to attend. If we're going to attend that complaint, it's going to be within less than an hour that we would attend. And with some officers local, that can mean that we can visit the area within less than an hour, but we don't always do that. So we do that on some occasions, and then we'll actually go out. At times, sometimes the checks that we do often aren't always in response to complaints. There's sometimes checks that we do because we receive complaints at late at night or early in the morning from this area, and we'll go and do the checks then. But if someone's out, then we'll review the system to see if anything's in during those times. So sometimes we have received complaints and we've out in the area. So there's no exact answer to your question, unfortunately, about what's the threshold to go out. It's based upon our experience.
Could we? Sorry, I know we've asked about additional information we could receive, and it's been volunteered. Is it possible we could get that information for whatever time period you're reporting on other information? How many complaints have then been investigated by a visit to substantiate? It would help to know then what sort of value it was given when it was visited to be substantiated, and how long from point of complaints to visit has occurred. Is that information that could be provided?
We haven't got it in that form, but probably what we can provide is the number of complaints, which will give the date and the time that somebody complained. And we can give the date and the time that we went out and did odour tours and the checks and the locations we went to. Right. We could also give the date and time that we did our site visit. The site visit forms are all dated and timed as well. So we could give complaints and separately the dates and times that we did our checks, how long we were there for, and similar visits, the dates and times we did those and how long we were there for.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Councillor Reddish.
I'm just going to change tack slightly. I mean, I have a theory that if you communicate the message, some of the battle is won. So I just want to ask a question of you good folk. What do you consider to be the best practice in terms of communication? I know you're going to say you're going to put something on the web or whatever, but I have to say, in sort of 20 years of being involved with Walley's Quarry, because I go back pre-landfill, I've never received a leaflet through my door that says what's happening. And I think sometimes from the residents I speak to, if they actually knew what was going on, they would feel slightly better about it. They might not like the information they get, but at least they'd say, thank you, the EA are doing something. So I just wonder if you can just comment on community relations and communication.
I think as Tim has explained, if people ask for feedback when they make complaints to us, then we will phone them direct and provide that feedback. So that's one way. The main way, and the same way with any site we regulate, is through the regular liaison meetings. The reason we attend the liaison meetings for Walley's Quarry Landfill is to provide a summary of the regulation we've done, details of complaints, answer questions from the attendees, and then the people that attend, people are represented on the liaison meeting. Partly their role is to then distribute that information where they need to parish council website, etc. as well. That's our approach to the communication. We have more for Walley's Quarry because we realised that information wasn't going out. So that's why we created the citizen space page, which we've got, where we have information regarding the landfill, and we do the community updates that we put on there, and we people where we've got that information. But the main purpose of the liaison meeting is to have that information from all regulators itself, and the notes of those meetings are published, but they are out and are available on the Red Industries website, but I'm not sure where else they're available.
So you don't think it would be good practice to actually deliver to each household? Because you couldn't have 6,000 residents at the liaison committee, could you?
No.
I mean, because the comment I get is, what's the point of ringing the EA up? Because we don't know what they do, they're useless, etc., etc., etc. No, that's not justified. But actually, if they communicated better to the residents and saying, well, this is the situation, this is what we're doing about it, and this is what we hope to do in the future, I think some residents would be less angry, if I'm honest.
And that's
think of.
Sorry, I think my technology is just playing up there. I think, Councillor, we do try to use a range of communication measures to engage with the community. We have used leaflets in the past in some areas, although as the Environment Agency, we would prefer not to use that method. We would prefer to use electronic communication where we can, obviously, to cut down on the recycling of materials used and therefore impact on the environment. However, we'd also like to hear from you and from the community how they would like to be engaged with, so we can, I guess, review our engagement methods and target them in a way that the community would like to see and hear from us as well.
I have to say, 20 years on the liaison committee, I have continually asked that question, and it doesn't happen. But anyway, we move on.
Could I ask a couple of different questions, if I may? Again, I'm afraid they're not awfully linked, but I think both of them are quite important. I mean, the first one is manifestly, and as your presentation pointed out, this site is rising in height as time goes by. As it rises in height, I'm assuming, it would seem to me to be the case, that the opportunity for odour to escape, be caught by the wind, or indeed material to be caught by the wind, is going to increase. Does the EA see a need for increasing safeguards in that regard? I mean, is the height a significant factor, in your opinion, as time goes by?
I think one thing that you're right, as the landfill start to rise out the ground, as the landfill does start to increase in height, it does mean that some areas of the site will actually be capped. There's one area of the site at the moment in the garden centre which is pretty much at final levels. So there could be the potential for odour to leave the site. Depends on the use of the daily cover. It doesn't really change. But as the landfill starts to rise and areas are at the final levels, then there will be both temporary cap and then permanent capping start to be installed at the landfill. So most of the site now is actually at ground level, and some areas are actually started to get to final levels, as Roger explained. So we will start to see and permanent capping going on, which reduces the potential for emissions. And it also means, because you've got a better deal for landfill, then you can start to pull harder on the gas engines in those areas. So the permanent structure goes in, and you can pull harder, so a reduction in the potential actually as the landfill starts to reach those final levels, capping starts to be installed.
Okay, if I may just something different, and this goes back to your two big surveys, or I think the word you use is audit, which always strings me a rather strange word because audit usually to me implies money, but nonetheless, let's stick with the jargon. I note that Public Health England weren't awfully happy with the citing of the monitor from one of those assessments, and of course, if the wind blows 50% of the time towards the monitor, that means for half the time it's blowing in a different direction. I just wonder why only one monitor? Would it not make sense to put several monitors around the site so you could sort of triangulate the data? So if the wind is blowing in the opposite direction but still carrying an odour, it would be picked up by another monitor rather than simply having a single point.
The monitoring, it's the most appropriate place to put it. There are some limitations to where the monitor can be installed, but 51% of the time was in our experts' view a good service. The rest of the time, the information about frequencies, the wind was blowing in a different direction, but these we haven't got that number of monitoring stations where we could do as you suggested. We did put it in two slightly different locations already. I don't feel another monitoring exercise at this time is going to give us more information we already have got.
Well, that surprises me, that answer. I mean, first of all, the two positions are either side of the road, so effectively it's the same position. You said in your presentation it was a small move. I find it curious that somebody thinks 51% is tremendous. I mean, essentially, if I had to think about my property, and I could keep it with the spin of a coin, I wouldn't think that was particularly good odds at the end of the day. You know, it's half and half. And that means that half the time, potentially, there is a problem, but it's not being picked up. And it's not being picked up because there is not more than one point where the information is being gathered. Going back to when I was a Boy Scout, when one looks at where one is, one triangulates and uses more than one datum to try and locate oneself. So I find that a little disappointing at the end of the day. I mean, I would be interested to see what the expert justification on a single point was, because at first sight, it doesn't seem to work. Councillor Rout wanted to say something.
I need to say that I very much agree with what you've just said, Councillor Fear, and in fact everything that the other officers have said. But I'm also very grateful for our guests for the presentation that they've given today and the questions that they've answered. Unfortunately, I have another commitment at 5, so I'm going to have to give my apologies for the rest of the meeting. But I wondered if you could do me the favour of allowing us to submit questions after this meeting, because we've had an awful lot of information that we may need to digest. So if it's possible through the chair, I'd like an opportunity to submit further questions after this meeting.
I'd ask Mr. Lyons, I think is the leader of the EEA team, whether he's happy with that. I hope he is, but...
Yes, thank you, Chair. We'll be more than happy to receive questions after today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Again, I'm grateful for this meeting today. Thank you very much.
Any further questions from other councillors? Or is 5 o'clock the time? It's been 2 hours after all. Councillor Jones, he's up for more.
No, I'm gonna. Don't worry. It's not for the EA. It's for Sean Fleet. I just wanted to check. You mentioned in your presentation at the start regarding the planning history of this site. You mentioned the ROMP that granted the ability to start tipping organic waste at the site. Can I just check, is that the 2012 ROMP? Because as County Councillor, if it was after that, I don't remember that coming to me to see. I just had a quick look to see when the ROMPs were issued by the County Council, and I think that was a 2012 one. I just want to make sure. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, you're still muted, Sean. Oh, you're okay now.
Cool. Yeah, 2016, I have a sort of a record of a review of the quarry as well. So
Yeah, I thought it might be. Yeah. It definitely wasn't 2017 plus whilst I've been
No, I actually think it was almost the late 90s when it was first looked at.
Yeah, this was the ability to.
I would say 1996.
I think
1996.
that was the original planning. I think the ability to tip organic waste was that wrong. Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, later. That was later.
Can I just ask one more question about enforcement, which I think I know the answer to, but I'd be grateful for chapter and verse. If you visit these sites, do you give them prior notification, or can the EA simply turn up and see what's happening?
We can turn up, we can do unannounced visits. We have powers of entry on site. Some are arranged because sometimes you want to talk to a person and that as well. So like Roger with the engineering works, you may want to talk grass engineers, but no, we can do unannounced as well.
No, thanks very much. I mean, I appreciate that, because very often it'd be appropriate to notify people precisely for the reasons you outline. But I have been asked whether you have the powers simply to arrive on site unannounced, and what I'm hearing is the answer is yes.
Yeah, we have. They're obviously at the moment with restrictions. Some visits, more visits have been announced, but that's obviously because completing health questionnaires, etc. So we've needed to do.
Thanks very much.
Even with the engineering visits, I'd just like to say that we would turn up unannounced as well, just to make sure they're following the procedures.
Thank you. No, that's very helpful to know.
I should also add that we don't pre-announce our odour tours either to the site. I carry those out if I'm doing one. I don't tell the operator that's what I'm doing till it's done.
So I think those are the final questions I wish to ask. And again, Mr. Lyons has kindly said that if I now think of something in half an hour's time, I can write to your team anyway. So I'm very grateful for that. I just want to ask my two colleagues if they've got any further points or questions to make at this juncture.
No, I don't think so.
Nothing from me.
In that case, obviously this task and finish group will continue with further meetings. We certainly would like to have a meeting of this form with the operator if the operator is willing. Potentially the group may feel that discussing this with Staffordshire Highways is an important point. But at this moment, what I'd like to do is thank very much the people from the EA for coming along, for giving such a lot of their time this afternoon, for giving us a very good presentation. And there's lots of stuff there that can be taken into the public domain and thought about, and for fielding and not evading the questions that we've asked them. I'm extremely grateful for that, and